We are a studio based in Amsterdam, and we're currently working for PlayStation 4 two titles. We got Killzone Shadowfall and a new yet unannounced IP that I unfortunately can't talk about. Killzone Shadowfall is our launch title for PS4, so that requires a bit of different approach for game making that you're gonna probably see during this presentation. This was also an announcement title shown on 20th of February, running 1080p 30 frames per second on the final dev kit on the final console. So the focus of today's presentation is gonna be on physically based lighting, physically based area light. This is the novel approach that we took for lighting our game. And I'm gonna give you a brief walkthrough through our rendering pipeline that we introduced for next generation consoles. So a bit of a history. Killzone 3, it was our big title that shipped in 2011. It was using quite a major PS3 technology, so the engine was pretty much final. We could finally focus on proper asset distribution, asset creation. And that's probably why it's considered one of the benchmark visual titles for PS3, or let's say our still current generation of consoles. So what brings the new generation of consoles? That brings Killzone Shadowfall. So I've got a couple of comparison screenshots that are actually a bit maybe unfair because those are promo shots from Killzone 3 versus in-game screenshots from Killzone 4. So what you're seeing right now is like a typical scene that we had in Killzone 3. That's pretty much, well, cityscape. And how does it compare to our next generation? I would say that we kind of pushed the limits of what we can achieve with landscapes, with cityscapes, pushing the real rendering in time to, let's say, like a horizon rendering of 30 kilometers, like in that scene. Same obviously happened for first-person view, so this is like a typical game screenshot actually captured on PS3 during gameplay. And this is the one captured from the presentation that you guys probably seen on 20th of February. Oh yeah, thank you for lighting, great, thanks guys. Another nice comparison screenshot of cityscapes. So here you can actually see a vast difference in dynamic lighting, basically how we push the crispness of the image. Of course, there's a resolution difference between 720p and 1080. So what we actually need to bring this kind of quality? What you're seeing right now is a typical asset that we were creating for Killzone 3. It's not very exciting asset, I would say. It's not too complex, but it's a typical thing that we used to build our levels. So just to give you a comparison of what we were aiming for, this is a typical asset that we have in Killzone 4 right now. I hope that you guys can see the difference in, let's say, triangle count, also high resolution textures, and what's most important for us is probably trying to ground the object in the environment. That's why we push our lighting. So we had a couple of new requirements for our objects. This old object was actually created with specific environment in mind. So what you're seeing as a reflection, for instance, was pre-baked in the model. The same for vertex lighting, for any kind of other lighting information. Everything was baked in. Therefore, you couldn't reuse this particular asset in any other level because it just looked odd, out of place. For the new generation of asset creation, we had to change that because otherwise the cost of actually building a game for this platform would be too high, considering our deadlines and amount of people that can actually work on the project. We needed something that's going to be a bit more robust, a bit more functional, and we also wanted to bring the quality a bit higher. So we looked towards physically based lighting. So what is physically based lighting? It's a complex system of actually asset creation as well as rendering that enables you to basically achieve hyperrealism or photorealism a bit easier than standard lighting models. Also, it gives you a consistent look in different HDR environments. And a couple of other things that we were particularly interested in were easy troubleshooting and extension, as well as simple material interface for our artist. That one was actually especially important for us because we are a very art-driven company. So let's say that the priority, if we're going to make a feature, depends on art direction, not really on tech. And our artists can really, really go crazy with their shaders, with amount of texturing work that they want to do. So what you're seeing right now is the typical asset for Killzone Shadowfall. This is actually viewed right now in our new lighting environment, so you can see, well, most of bells and whistles running. and this is like a standard T-pose. So this is what we are aiming for, and we want to achieve the same result in probably better time than previous assets. So first, I'm gonna tell you a bit about the theory. I think that this is quite interesting actually also for artists. This is part of the presentation that we normally give to our artists during lighting workshops at our company. So if we talk about light flux, we can differentiate between radiance and irradiance. There's a description of the light that's coming from all directions, which is irradiance, probably for most of you known as diffuse lighting. And we've got radiance. This is the lighting coming from one direction only. That's probably known better as specular or let's say reflection lighting. We also have a notion of something called image-based lighting, IBLs. If I'm going to mention IBL, that means that the source of the lighting comes from an image. This is a technique that was developed pretty much for movie set acquisition. By set acquisition, I mean that you've got a bunch of people shooting a movie in outside environment with real-life actors, and then they want to use CGI. So to blend the CGI with actors, they have to acquire the lighting information of the scene. So the easiest way to do it is actually capture, well, this kind of ball. What you're seeing here is a 18% white, so kind of like a gray ball, capturing the diffuse lighting of the environment that you're seeing. This is a chrome ball that's mostly used to capture HDR lighting of reflection of your environment. So later, you can actually use information from those probes to relight your assets for your CGI shot. This is a shot taken from ILM guys, it's their courtesy, and it's from Terminator. As you can see, they can use the same asset to actually blend it into the environment, even changing the environment. So it's quite possible to, let's say, change the environment of the shoot without reshooting the live action footage, which is like a really interesting technique and guarantees a really high quality. So physically based lighting is actually well defined from math point of view. We made a couple of, let's say, important changes to the whole thing. We basically split the lighting model into a physically based shading model, which is responsible for surface interaction with lighting. And the second part is called physically based lights, which is responsible for actual light flux calculation in the scene. We made this differentiation from standard lighting models to actually be able to swap lighting in our game between different subsystems without breaking the visual quality of the image, the visual integrity of what we actually have. Imagine that you're working for a first-party title that's a launch title. You don't have that much time to actually make the tech and to actually outsource all your assets. Therefore, we had to start making levels, making graphics and outsourcing before we had the tech running. We needed that to actually be able to switch in the new tech with current assets. So we wanted to keep the quality the same. So physically based shading, it's super important for artists to actually understand what we are talking about here. The concept of diffuse lighting is super easy actually. Like most people really understand why it works, how it works. However, specular is something that most people tend to actually forget about, or they don't really treat it as an important visual clue. But the thing is that specular is actually the most important parameter of your lighting equation, and the most important visual cue. So what you see here is actually a real-life photograph of a plate in that case. This is a specific shot that was actually done using one light source with a rectangular polarized filter put on the light, and there was a second polarized filter put on the lens. If you get those two filters at right about 90-degree angle, you can actually eliminate your specular reflections from the light totally. This is a super interesting technique if you actually want to research how lighting works in real life. So this is what we're doing at our company, and we basically take two shots of the real-life object under a specific lighting condition. So after some math operations on the image with specular or without specular, we can get back the diffuse or specular lighting. So as you can see, single typical plate that you've got in your house got quite a lot of specular. Then something maybe not as common, brick. Not many people have bricks at house, but this is important if you're building anything in your world. You still see a ton of specular lighting. Same with cardboard, with any other real-life material. This is also really interesting because you can see how saturated the actual diffuse lighting is. Like if you look at those scissors at the orange part of them, it's super saturated. And the specular is actually the thing that's giving you the final clue about what kind of material is that and how lighting actually behaves in the scene. So if you would like to actually describe this from math point of view, we would call it BRDF. BRDF is bidirectional reflectance distribution function. There's a math function that's used to give you an idea how your lighting the scene is going to behave, how much lighting is actually going to be treated as specular, it's going to give you a reflection, and how much is going to be part of the diffuse. So if you'd like to have like a physical image of what it actually does, it will look pretty much like this. So if you look at the green arrow is your eye vector. So this is the position and the direction at which you're actually looking at the image. The blue light is the diffuse light. So this is the light that actually is scattered around. This is the light that actually gets into the surface, resurfaces back, and gives you this kind of nice global illumination effect. And then those yellow arrows are actually giving you the actual specular. So you can notice that the angle between eye vector and your specular is actually behaving like a reflection. That's exactly how it works. Also, you can also change the eye vector to light vector because, well, as I said, the function is bi-directional, right? So it's going to work as well for the eye as well as for the light. That's why we can sometimes swap the function input with output, and we're going to get pretty much the same results. Another very, very important part of like physical lighting is the Fresnel effect. So the Fresnel effect is basically part of standard physical optics that you learn, I know, in middle school. So you know that if there's a surface and you've got a light ray or whatever, basically hitting the surface, it's gonna split in reflection vector and in refraction vector. The amount of the split is actually decided by IOR of the surface, so of your material that the ray is going to intersect, as well as the environment around it. So IOR is given for any kind of material in real life, so you can get it from physical tables, and well, you can also calculate it yourself. So depending on IOR, your lighting is going to behave a bit different, and going to give you this kind of like Fresnel effect that you can see, let's say, on lakes. If you stand at the shore of the lake, you can clearly see the reflection of the other side, like, you know, like trees and mountains. However, if you're actually flying over the lake and you look top down on the lake, you're probably not going to see much of the reflection. You're going to see the refraction, so the actual bottom of the lake or whatever is going to scatter underneath the surface of the lake. So this is the Fresnel effect, and it's basically an angle-dependent effect. So at grazing angles, you've got more light reflected, and this depends on the surface IOR, and IOR, on the other hand, depends on the surface substance, whether it's a metal, whether it's a plastic, whether it's cardboard, whatever else. So on the right side, you can actually see the graph that shows you the typical amount of reflection light depending on your angle at which you're actually looking at the surface. So you can see that, let's say, something like water and glass, that's actually seen here as blue or green, doesn't really have that much reflection looking front on, but it's got tons of reflections looking at grazing angle. On the other hand, if you look at metals like iron, let's say aluminium, or silver, you can actually see that they always reflect almost the same amount of light. What's even more interesting is that metals are actually changing the amount of light they reflect based on wavelength. That means that you're going to have color specular. It's not going to be monochromatic. So this is what we call the Fresnel effect. And those things like Fresnel effect and basically the theory behind the BRDF can give you a base how to describe how metals or non-metals, which are the two main substances in the world, are going to behave in terms of lighting. For non-metals, we can observe diffuse lighting and specular lighting. It's basically like a standard thing that I already told you about during PRDF presentation. However, metals behave a bit different. Metals don't really diffuse light. They only reflect light. In most cases, well, I'm saying they only reflect light because the amount of diffuse is minimal. Even if there's going to be a light ray actually getting through the surface of a metal, like getting inside of the metal, it's not going to resurface because the structure of metal, like, you know, on atom level, is just too tightly packed, right? It's not going to let the ray go out of metal. So this is how it works. On the contrary, if you've got something like skin or wax, which is obviously a non-metal, and it's got really loose structure of atoms inside, you can actually see light resurfacing as, let's say, subsurface scattering. So that's why if you've got sun and you look at the sun and you look at your hand, you can see that on the sides of your fingers, you see some light shining through, right? This is what we call subsurface scattering. So if you would be, well, if you are an artist and you like to paint some textures, let's say for metals, this is something new probably, your diffuse should be black. There should be no diffuse. What we actually do at Guerrilla, we throw away diffuse textures for any kind of metal surface that we got in game, which is a kind of lifesaver. You don't need textures, that's pretty cool, right? And you just put black there. Roughness, that's another very important part of any kind of surface model. So what you see here is basically, well, a surface with nicely aligned, whatever, micro tiles, atoms, whatever. I don't want to go to atoms, like micro tiles of the surface. So if you've got a mirror, your reflection is going to be pretty much perfect, right? The rays that are going to reflect from the surface are not going to scatter too much. They're going to pretty much be like mirror reflection. They're going to show you a really nice, sharp, crisp image. However, if your surface would be a bit more uneven, a bit more scattered, the light that's going to reflect from the surface is also going to scatter. So in the end, you're going to end up with really kind of like blurred reflection. This is also really interesting that if you would have a perfectly rough surface, which probably doesn't exist, but from math point of view, your specular would actually be exactly the same as diffuse. However, it will be angle dependent. So you would end up with basically a surface having like two diffuse contributions just at different angles. That's actually quite interesting if you're doing global illumination or any kind of like really light integration techniques in your engine. Now something that some other lighting models forget about, this visibility or self-shadowing. This quite interesting concept that if you've got a rough surface, most of the rays are actually not going to get out of the surface because you've got like those tiny grooves, like, you know, the rough part of the material. So you've got a ray coming into the material. Let's say that half of those reflected rays are actually going to hit some internal small walls, you know, like inside of the material. That's why you have to account for it. So basically, you've got a rough material, like rough metal. You're still going to see the reflection, but the reflection might actually get darker when the roughness gets higher. If the material is going to be more rough, it might get darker. Also, another important part about physical-based lighting is energy conservation. What that means is that the amount of light that actually gets into your scene is pretty much close to the same that the amount of light that gets out of your scene. The equation is pretty simple. The lighting that gets out is less or equal to light that gets in. If you don't forget about this, that's going to be very, very good for your artist because you're going to have full control over lighting in your scene. Basically, if you've got artists that tend to, let's say, tweak or like fake reflections, fake lighting, you might have troubles when you want to implement, let's say, global illumination because your lighting is not going to behave correctly. You actually need that for correct behavior. So visually, it's also really interesting because if you look at non-energy conservative lighting model, you can see that with higher glossiness or like roughness of the surface, you actually get more light than, let's say, with a specular, like speckle, right, when it's very, very crisp. With energy conservative lighting model, what should actually happen is that the amount of light that you get in the rough part should be equal to the sum of lighting that you see on this tiny speckle here, on the very crisp and sharp reflection. So I highly recommend actually keeping everything normalized in your lighting model. So what you're seeing here is a typical shader template base that we have for our materials. This is something that our artists create, and we can basically use it to slap on different materials to, let's say, do something like material bombing of our assets. So our artists, they don't really need to rediscover, let's say, what aluminum is, or let's say what copper is. They just open the library of predefined shaders, predefined texture templates, and just throw it in Photoshop so they can actually paint it over and, well, make art. And this is like a viewer that you get with different materials. So you can see how the response of the material changes with different roughness, with different specular reflectance. And specular reflectance is something I didn't tell you about yet. So specular reflectance is the actual implementation of our IOR, of the Frenell effect. I told you that Frenell effect is based on wavelengths for some metals. So you get the color specular. So we call it specular reflectance if you actually paint the texture, and this is an RGB texture. So this is how you define titanium, gold, copper, or silver. So you can actually paint using your kind of like a visual idea what gold would be for reflectance, and you get a guarantee that the actual material is going to behave like, well, the metal that you're defining. Here we got a similar template for plastics, for non-metals. So you can already see that there's like a totally different Frenell effect. You can see that we've got more reflection on grazing angles on those spheres. You can also see that there's a monochromatic reflection. So most metals, actually most non-metals, actually all non-metals that I know, they don't really scatter the wavelengths during reflection. So the reflection should be monochromatic. It should be the color of your environment, of your light. It should not be tinted. So how the whole workflow actually works like. So we've got three main parameters. We've got Albedo texture, which is RGB8. We've got Roughness Texture, which is single channel. And we've got Specular Reflectance, which is also RGB8. Our artists need only to specify those three input colors or three input textures. That's pretty easy and quite intuitive. Then the very important part of the workflow is the material response. So we decided, as I said previously, to decouple lighting from material shading. That means that if you're an artist actually making an asset, he doesn't need to know what kind of lighting environment is going to be around the asset. We don't even need to check that because this is irrelevant. This is like orthogonal. Those things are going to work always. The same on the other side. If you've got lighting artist, he doesn't need to think about materials he uses in the level, which is very convenient. What we do to actually make those reviews of assets possible, what we do to submit assets, we've got a review environment with a bunch of IBOs, pre-computed probes containing different lighting scenarios, just for like a visual reference, how this material is going to look in that environment and that environment. But we don't use one of them, we use all of them for our reviews. So we make sure that the asset actually looks okay in any kind of lighting environment. And from experience, I can tell that if you make it work with one environment, because of the unification of the lighting model and decoupling for the material shading from lighting, it's going to work in any other kind of situation. The asset that you're actually seeing on the right side is the asset used in Killzone 3. I use this asset specifically because I want to show you how the workflow changed, maybe evolved over the years. So this particular asset was retrofitted from Killzone 3. The asset actually had baked in reflections, it actually had baked in shadowing, everything was painted by hand inside of this single mesh. Also, the shader itself was very complex. It was sampling cube maps, it was doing tons of things that, well, I didn't even understand, to be honest. It was like an artist's imagination, artist's impression of how this thing should behave. So what I actually did personally with this model, I stripped it away from the shader, I hooked up a simple shader for our new material lighting model, and we tested it in different lighting environments, and suddenly it started behaving properly. We could swap IBOs, we could swap levels, and it would always work. So this is actually the comparison. On the left side, you've got the same asset with old lighting model, I mean not really lighting model, but the material shading model, being lit by the pre-baked environment that was baked into the textures. On the right side, you've got the lighting environment extracted from the model, so used like actual lighting environment, and comparing that gives you an idea that we are quite close to previous result, but we managed to get more contrast and, let's say, differentiation of materials. With the new lighting model on the right side, you can clearly see that you've got bullet holes that are actually showing you metal underneath. You can also see there's no weird reflection going on the back side of the panel, because on the left you can see there's like kind of like a foil, like a wrapped foil around the object. So basically we fixed a couple of artifacts that were unfixable in the previous model. And then we can do pretty much this. We can change our lighting. We change our IBLs, we change our lighting environment, and it behaves correctly. That's exactly what we actually wanted. The super interesting thing about this was the actual timing of the change. It took me 1 hour to basically retrofit this one particular asset, and our artists could actually take all the assets from Killzone 3 and retrofit them under 30 minutes. So our pipeline suddenly was much, much faster. They started to learn how to achieve the effect they had with the new tools, and they could actually achieve the same effect faster or actually get better, higher quality. This is also a Killzone 3 asset, retrofitted for the new shading model. You can see how the roughness behaves. So if you change the roughness of the model, obviously the reflection is going to be different. The behavior of visibility function, the whole lighting model is going to behave a bit different. So how we actually solved the idea of painting those textures, because I've been talking about math, I've been talking about physical values. So when I showed this presentation to our artists, they were like pretty terrified, to be honest, because there's a guy talking about math and some other physical stuff. So we had to find a way how to actually teach our artists to actually use those tools and how to make it intuitive. So we calculated all those physical values, we put them in noise tables, and then we actually recalculate those values again to make them visually plausible. So if I ask my artist, let's say we need titanium plate, you don't need to put like 0 point something from a physical table in your texture. You just get a texture color palette in Photoshop, like the one on the right, and you just pick the color. The color is basically fitted for artists to be visually close to what you would describe gold, what you would describe metal, aluminum, copper. So they can actually paint with those values, but internally, those values are translated to physical values in the engine. So every material can actually be roughly defined by those parameters. I mean, albedo, spectral reflectance, and roughness. And for most of them, we have those physical tables with colors that you can use in Photoshop from your color swatches. So this is one of our use cases. I already shown you the asset, but now I'm going to show you the actual training plates that we use for our artists to show them how you're supposed to change the way how you think about an asset. So I'm going to be very sorry right now because those textures are done by me, so it's going to be like coder's art. However, I'm quite proud of them, so it's not that bad. So this is the reasoning that you should have behind this. I didn't change the plate, so this is the same plate that we use internally, so if there's like a typo or something, sorry, I didn't fix that. But the reasoning is very important. So this is like a simplified roughness texture. Basically, if something gets brighter in this texture, that means that the surface is going to be more mirror-like. It's going to have sharper reflections. Darker means it's going to be like very, very rough. So previously, our artists were kind of painting those textures, not really knowing what they are doing. Like, okay, I want to get this effect, so maybe I'm going to try painting this. But they were not really like mentally thinking about what I want to achieve, like what this surface feels like, what this surface would feel if I would have it in my hand. This is the thing that we tried to show them, that it might be easier for you guys to actually think about real-life objects, like how it feels, how this would behave in real life, instead of actually trying to paint everything in. So let's say you've got like old paint, right? So you would get that roughness is going to be like medium, it's going to be a bit kind of spotty, maybe. Then you've got a bullet hole. That's interesting. From physical point of view, a bullet hole is actually super smooth because you've got high temperature and impact. This kind of smooths out the metal structure, so you get like a mirror-like reflection on your bullet holes. So this is something that actually our artists find really interesting, that okay, I can actually think about real-life things, how they happen, I can actually use it in texture without actually spending half a day trying different values. I know that this is going to work, because, well, this might happen in real life. Another plate is showing the simplified Specular Reflectance texture. So it's super simple. It's just an outline of a different material. So you just specify material. Okay, this is going to be rust. It's going to be this material. It's going to be iron. I'm going to take it from the color swatch from Photoshop. They don't even put too many details in those textures. I would say that our Specular Reflectance textures are super, super smooth. They are really, really flat. And then you get the albedo texture. This is a bit unfair comparison because this albedo texture is actually the old albedo texture. If I would show you the current assets, current albedo texture are super flat. They don't have all those details. They don't have shadowing. We don't take those things in. We've got real-time systems actually doing it for us. And this is super, super intuitive for artists because they can actually prepare lots and lots of templates. They don't need to bake in lighting. They don't need to bake in details. They can just slap them in like a multi-layered shader. So let's say making a weathering effect dynamically in real time is very easy. So basically to sum up, I've shown you the whole way that we actually went through to achieve certain effects. And well, we are quite happy with the results. The visual quality is up to you guys to decide whether this is meeting the, well, let's say the next generation or not. There's also the art direction part. But from production point of view, we are very, very happy about the whole system because it allowed us to actually finish the game for the PS4 reveal. It is going to allow us to basically launch it as a next generation game. I can say that without this kind of system that simplifies the work of our artists, we would probably have serious problems actually finishing this kind of quality, this kind of polish of the game for launch. So how we actually achieve that? So a bit maybe about Shadowfall's BRDF model that we use. We've got a standard Frenell approximation, that's Smith-Schlick approximation. The actual math for it's going to be in the slide notes that you can download after this presentation. We've got the geometric attenuation factor based on Smith-Schlick visibility function. We use the normalization of the whole model based on spectral reflectance. So basically, if your artists are using a spectral reflectance to define a metal, this calculation is going to automatically lower the diffuse. So even if you've got a really, really stubborn artist that's going to say, no, I want to have my diffuse white in metal, well, we're going to fix that for him, right? I mean, we don't want to have like technical bugs in the system. Another important thing is probably roughness and how we actually use it. There's this like weird name here, specular importance cone angle. This is something that's probably new to all of you guys. This is something that's not used in real time too much. But this is a concept from offline rendering, and I'm gonna elaborate about this in a second. But our roughness internally is not really what all of you guys are probably used to. And we also support approximate translucency, which means that every material in the game is actually semi-translucent. It's got like internal scattering. We've got a different renderer, so our G buffer must sustain parameters for any kind of material. So this is why every material actually supports kind of translucency. As for the translucency, it's pretty simple, I would say. It allows you to get glossy translucency, some form of subsurface scattering. And you can see a bit of it actually on the foliage on those trees there on the building. It's maybe not the best shot to show that, but you can already see there's some yellow light coming through the leaves. This is not painted in. This is actually the part of the translucency lighting model. Oh, and I actually forgot to say that the BRDF, like the base of the BRDF, is actually based on Cook Torrance lighting model. And obviously this is only the material part of the Cook Torrance. As I said, we split the lighting part from the material part. So all those parameters that we use are kind of well researched, well behaved, and you can use them right away from physical tables. Another important thing, I was talking quite a lot about those IBLs previously, but we didn't really see how they fit into this whole thing. So just a simple case for now. Imagine that you've got your standard skybox or any kind of reflection cube map, maybe some other image-based lighting method, and you need to sample your environment somehow, right? In most cases, what happens in most engines that I worked with, or I've seen working with lighting models, like more advanced lighting models, is that they sample one direction from the cube map, and they use the Fresnel, the visibility factors, and all those BRDF parameters from the actual lighting calculation, as if they would be actually lighting a point, not a multiple points coming from a cube map. Which is obviously wrong. It doesn't make any sense in math, and it gives pretty wrong results that, well, once you see them, you can't pretty much unsee them. So this is image-based lighting using point-based BRDF. It looks kind of okay if you don't really know how the final frame is supposed to look. I would say it looks a bit blank, you know, it lacks kind of contrast in lighting, in speculars. And this is the actual BRDF factor. So this is like a visual interpretation of all this math that we've been talking about. So what happens internally in the engine is that we calculate this value that you're seeing right now. We multiply this over our reflection from any kind of image-based lighting system. So okay, you've got like sky dome, which is blue. We're gonna multiply that by those tones of whites. You can see the engine jets, those flaps from engine jets. They are kind of like copper alike. So they're gonna tint the reflection with this yellowish brownish color. And this is how this factor looks like. So this has got one major flaw. The fault of this model is that it's for a single point. If you've got a cube map and you've got your approximation of multiple points, you are actually supposed to calculate your BRDF separate for every point that you're sampling from the cube map. Most cube maps go to blurriness levels, like different roughness levels in mid maps. That's also what we use. But still, the BRDF is based on viewing angle, and is based on some other angles that are not part of the cube map. So you have to split this part of the calculation from the actual cube map pre-convolution from the blurry kernel, and you have to treat it as if that will be integrated. So this is the actual result that you are supposed to have. This is one point-based BRDF, and this is multiple point-based BRDF. This is the actual integral, runtime integral of all the points that you are sampling from your different roughness levels of your cube map. So you can imagine that the lowest MIP map on your cube map is representing a really, really rough reflection, like a blurry reflection that you're going to get on really rough surface. So you would actually need to integrate your BRDF for all the points from your hemisphere, as well as take care for like specular occlusion. You can see that on the wings, there's a big difference in this like crevice there. I hope that you actually see this like on the wing side. So without this kind of additional integration part, you would see glowing parts under the hull under the hull connection with the wing. On top right, you can actually see two textures. There are like 2D textures. There are lookup textures for the pre-integration of the BRDF. BRDF integration is a 5D integral. I guess it's pretty hard to do with the runtime. So what we did, we got a running model in Mathematica, and it calculates the proper integral result in 3D texture. Then we do a linear decomposition of the 3D texture into two 2D textures, and we do the rest of the math at runtime. So those two textures in top right, they are actually being looked up by roughness and by viewing angle. So this is the final result. This is the correct result of lighting this scene with image-based lighting. This is the difference that you get from wrong point-based specular lookup and the actual corrected proper integral of BRDF. I would say that this is worth it. All right, so we've covered quite a lot of basics here, quite a lot of things that are probably new to you guys. Maybe some of you guys are already using that. In that case, I would really like to talk with you after this presentation to share some knowledge. But for all of you, definitely this is a huge win. Whatever kind of production you're having, whether this is mobile, whether this is actually for next gen, whether it's like for big consoles, I guess it will be better for you to actually switch to a physically based lighting model. Current mobile consoles, they can also sustain the additional LAU count, the performance hit for this kind of lighting model. So you can do it right now, whatever you're developing, and I can only guess that it's going to be faster for you to develop your title, and the asset production is going to be just much, much better, much faster. So one final thing that's probably very important, how to actually deal with the whole change in your company, like Guerrilla Games. We've got 200 people. Those people were trained in Killzone 3 old school lighting model, right? And then we've got a couple of guys from tech team saying, okay, we're going to change everything in the game. We've got outsourcing from a couple of other companies making assets for us. It's like a huge production. And suddenly you want to change everything. And basically, for half a year, we were really, really struggling internally. We had tons of meetings. We actually canceled this thing a couple of times. In the end, it was all about us, coders, finding good people on our side. Good people, I mean technically skilled artists. Getting them re-engaged into this whole thing, like interesting them. And then asking them to actually try that, to show some results, that you can get the same quality, better quality in shorter time. It was all a matter of workshops, tutorials, of preparing all those different lighting environments, preparing all those color swatches for Photoshop, lots of work in documentation and tutorials. So we had like workshops every month. If there was a new artist coming to the studio from other teams around the world, we're like, sorry, you know what, like everything you learned for the last 5 years of your career, well, we're gonna throw it out, no, change it for something new and cool. But then you can change the company for, let's say, movies, right? It's gonna be cool. So most of those guys actually really like that. So this is right now what we've got real time is the way how movie companies deal with VFX when they're building their physically based scenes. So results. This is one of our assets that we got from outsourcing. It's viewed in Maya. In Maya, we've got implemented full deferred renderer from Killzone. So this is actually the final result you're going to get in game with all the bells and whistles turned on. So you can see some internal reflections. You see real-time ray tracing there, image-based lighting, pretty much everything we've got. Another interesting part, making this asset just textures, about 1 hour. It's super fast, super simple. Those textures are really, really flat. I actually don't have those textures with me, but I guess that you can trust me on that they're just flat, you know, just gray, nothing else. And this is the cool part. If you want to do a dirt version of it, you just slap some textures on top. You don't change the base, because the base is still a metal. But you just, let's say, bomb that with dirt. You take the dirt template, you slap it on, 3 hours, you've got this asset. So from production point of view, super easy. All the lighting systems are going to follow that because they're based on the same BRDF, on the same unified lighting system that you want to introduce for all your lighting systems, for real-time lights, for image-based lighting, even for post-processing, as we actually did. So now I'm going to talk about actually the second part of the whole change about physically based lights. Here you can see one of our area lights. This is like a new type of lights that I don't really know any other game supporting them, at least to this kind of extent. So let's start from basics. What is a light in a game? In most real-time applications, a dynamic light calculated runtime is a point light, which means that it doesn't have any size and behaves using the standard blink-fong-based lighting model. I mean, I'm just saying in those cases, there are obviously engines that are doing that much, much better, right? But that would be a bit unfair probably in comparison. So this is a plain, basic, pure blink-fong lighting model. Not too exciting, everyone knows how it behaves. This is our light room that we use for our light testing for different subsystems. The interesting part is on the left side. So the gizmo that you see from Maya is the center of the light. So this is our modified blink-fong point light working with our material shading model. So you see that maybe looks a bit better, hard to judge, but still it's a point light. So if you look here, this is always going to look like this. Sharp reflection of your point light, well, it's a point. You can't change that. Obviously, you can change the roughness, you can do some tricks, but this might be hard. And what are real lights? All the real lights are actually area lights. Every light source in our environment, it's got size, it's got shape, it's got orientation, and also got the luminous flux coming from every point of this light. It would be pretty hard to imagine, let's say, this room with point lights. I mean, it would look probably ridiculous, to be honest. Back to the point, area lights are the base of photography in light studios. If you ask any kind of photographer, they're going to tell you, okay, we need a softbox, we need a big light, we need a reflector that's actually got a size. You want to have a nice portrait, you actually want to use a softbox to have nice spectral reflection on eyes of your subject, you know, like basic things from photography. And the thing is that all our artists are actually from photography background, from architectural design background. They don't really like the concept of point lights. It seems very unnatural to them. So that's why we ended up with tons of different hacks. What we've noticed that started happening when we switched to the lighting model, to the new material model, is that our artists started to make everything super rough. Because they were doing an open scenario for the demo, so they wanted to have a really nice big reflection of the sun. And, well, they ended up with a really nice big reflection of the sun, but everything started to be rough. So you had local lights, it looked pretty bad. We introduced those area lights. Like here you can see the reflection of the sun. It's super crisp, super sharp, and you can see this is not the point. How we define the sunlight? We define it by solid angle that's actually visible from the surface of the planet. You can also type in, I know, light years in distance and kilometers per radius, and it's going to work. We decided to go this way to actually enable the final decoupling of the lighting from the actual materials. So every light that you're going to see in Killzone, Shadowfall, every lighting subsystem is based on area lights. So how it actually looks in kind of an enclosed environment. We define those lights pretty much like every other light from, let's say, offline vendor like Mental Ray or something that's actually physically based. So you've got a light type, which is a spherical light. Omni light. Well, it's going to be a spherical light. So you give your light a radius. You can have spotlights with a source of rectangle, the source of a disk. And you can also have texture lights, obviously like cube map texture-based lights and other lights that are going to have real-life, physical definition of the shape and the size. So the size is basically based on meters. You got width and height for planar lights, and you got radius for spherical lights. We also define the intensity of light in lumens and lux. So there's like interchangeable, you can recalculate that back. This is super cool if someone actually knows how to do architectural design. So back to the spherical light. You can see that right now the spectral reflection is actually starting to behave like a reflection of the light source. It's super sharp, but it's on the point. The same with diffuse. You can see that actually if it's a sphere, it's gonna get its sides, the sides of the sphere light are gonna get closer to the wall. So you see a different attenuation factor. The attenuation factors are actually real-time integrals of the light shape. Therefore, they're always kind of physically correct. So let's say that we want to compare a spherical light with this light. You instantly see that the shape of the reflection actually changed. If you've got a reflection of a sphere, it's the same from every viewing angle, right? Because it's a sphere. A disk is obviously going to behave different, so we account for it. The same with the attenuation factor for diffuse lighting. Then we've got rectangular lights, so you can specify really long line lights, you can specify windows, you can specify, well, rectangulars, right? Which is very interesting if you actually want to have something like real-time reflections work with dynamic lights, because otherwise it's really hard to achieve that. We also can slap pre-integrated textures. We've got a tool pipeline that actually gets a texture that an artist wants to slap on the light, and it's going to pre-convolve the texture. It's going to create two textures. The diffuse pre-integrated texture and specular pre-integrated texture that are used as texture lookups for those lights, so we can get the specular reflection, actually the size and shape of the light with textures. And you can also animate them. So if you got a billboard animation, then your specular reflections all over your game are going to be, well, basically reflections of the billboard, animated. You can also see that obviously the shape is retained as well as the texture. And now, probably the most interesting aspect of area lights from workflow point of view. If you think about area lights, like physical lights, what is the actual amount of light that the scene gets from the light? It's the size of the light multiplied by intensity of every point of the light. So let's say that you want to change the diffuse lighting in your level, like in this case. So we can do two things. We can change the shape of the light, not touching the intensity. And if the shape is going to grow bigger, you're going to have more diffuse lighting in your scene, right? You can do the other way around. You can keep the size the same, and you can just give more intensity. So you can achieve two results with the same result with two different ways. Let's look at this specular here. It's a pretty strong specular. What I want to show is basically the same diffuse light in the scene, but with a different type of specular. As you can see, the diffuse lighting stayed roughly the same. What I did, I changed the shape of the light to be much bigger. And I lowered the intensity by the correct amount. Which means that the diffuse lighting stays the same, but the specular reflection is actually changed because it reflects the shape and the intensity of the light, and everything, well, works, right? You can basically run GI on this, you can run real-time ray tracing, you can do whatever you want, and this is still gonna work because, well, it makes sense from that point of view. So our artists, I have to say, they really, really love the whole idea about area lights because, well, they don't need to do tricks with materials, right? If they're gonna do lighting, our lighting artists, they don't even know what kind of materials are in the scene. Material artists, they don't even need to know the lighting. Everything's just gonna work because this decoupling of lighting, like total decoupling, is really helping them out. There's like the situation with the sunlight. We had this like muddy terrain where we wanted to have a spotlight, like a searchlight. So if you like to have a big searchlight chasing the player, you would like to have a really nice big specular from it, right? So our artists started to change the roughness of the surface of mud and water, which looked pretty bad close-up and reflections of cube maps. So this solves that. So I highly recommend going into research or getting code snippets from us when they're going to be publicly available. Another interesting caveat of having area lights is basically distance-based roughness of your, well, the perceived roughness of your reflection. So if you got an area light and you got something semi-glossy, with distance the reflection is going to get, well, more glossy. That's how it works in real life. And it's obviously supported by the model itself because the model is physically based. So all those like small phenomena, they are supported right out of the box. So how this actually works? I mentioned this roughness called importance, angle of importance cone. And this is a concept from importance sampling, offline rendering. In offline rendering, if you want to render reflections, like glossy reflection or GI, you shoot a bunch of rays. And those rays are just, going all around the scene. For every ray, you calculate the BRDF, you calculate the result, and you just get the final sum, integrated over your hemisphere or something like that. But the importance sampling is a concept that means that you can speed those things up by only calculating rays in meaningful directions. And what is a meaningful direction? So if you know that you've got a specific reflection vector and you know that there's a specific roughness of the surface, you know that the most important rays are only going to happen in a specific direction like this. Yellow line shows you the reflection angle. So you can see the reflection vector. And all the rays shot around the reflection vector are going to be kind of important. And we can specify what is an important ray. So let's say that every ray that's got a weight over like a person ray or whatever, let's say 5 person or 5, whatever, like 5 promils, is going to be important. So we define the cone that actually wraps around all those rays as our roughness. So this cone that you're seeing is the definition of our roughness. If you paint roughness texture, you're actually painting this angle in radians. The angle of this cone. So this is how we do it in math, how we do it from the engine point of view. Artists, they don't really need to know about this. But for us, it's super important because we can use this concept to run area lights, to run reflections, to run GI, to run everything we've got in our subsystems. So a couple of interesting things that actually happen. Let's say that you are looking at 2 different points on your surface. And obviously the cone is projected on objects that you want to gather reflections from, right? So let's say that you've got the red ray and it's closer to the actual object. So the cone is going to be projected on the object, but the size of the projected cone is going to be pretty small because it's close to an object, right? You can't project farther away. But if you got a point that's actually closer to you, to the observer, the projected cone is going to be much wider. And what do you do now? In important sampling, you would pretty much sample all the points from the projected area between the green thingy on the right and the cone. Which means that the red reflection will be pretty sharp, whereas the yellow one will be pretty blurry. So if you think about this, approximated by our cones from roughness, that starts to make sense, right? So this is our result. With distance, the projected cone of our roughness is a bit different, right? It's a bit wider, so the reflection starts getting wider because the integral that we calculate runtime is defined over different area. Also, if you've got a material that's anisotropic, you can change your cone to ellipsoid, right? You can project your cone as ellipsoid, and you've got anisotropy. If you want to have some specific roughness-based effects, you just change the behavior of the cone and you're done. Everything else is going to follow. This is actually an image that I used to describe the concept of integration of lights to our artists. This is a very early on concept with Killzone 3 NPC. So what does it mean to integrate lights? Let's say that you want to have a photo shoot with this lady and you want to have an area light in front of her. How can you do it right now with current engines with point lights? You just have a bunch of point lights and you try to approximate a rectangle with a bunch of point lights. On the left side, you see the rectangle. It's doing nothing. It's like a fake thing. And there are 5 point lights. And you can see the result is actually not that bad. It's not that harsh, but you can see that there's too much lighting on her forehead. The shadows are a bit kind of harsh. It doesn't really work that well, and it costs you 5 point lights. And if you would see the specular reflection on her eyes, you would see actually 5 small points, which is not nice. And this is the same effect with one area light. The cost of running one area light is something like 10–15% higher than running a point light in our engine, with all the optimization for PS4. So it's definitely worth it. The result is the actual integral of this lighting. So you can see that the lighting is actually so much softer. You can actually see that those shadows on her cheeks are actually from a wider angle. They're from wider light source. So this is how you can understand the integration of lights. You could get area lights in your game just by using thousands of point lights. But if you can do it in math, you can integrate that, just go for it. So how do you do that? So this is the only integral I promised to have in this presentation. All the people that actually want to calculate this, I invite them to do this using extra slides that are going to be in the presentation online. I'm not going to go through this, but this is actually a pretty simple, conceptually simple integral. Calculating that live in your shaders, not that trivial. The easy part is that you basically shoot your vector and you integrate the diffuse contribution, the irradiance contribution for every point on your area light shape in a 3-dimensional space, which is actually pretty easy until you get to the cosine n.l part, which is super tricky. And you're going to see the rest in bonus slides. The specular is probably more interesting. This is something that is actually conceptually quite easy to understand. So imagine that you got your specular cone, right, that we shoot at our light. Green thingy on the right, our area light source. area of the cone is basically area of our integration of specular. So we shoot that at our light. We calculate the projected cone. So the projected cone on the light space is going to be a circle, right? So we go to 2D space. So now we have to solve the integral in 2D space, which is going to be equal to the integral in 3D space, obviously normalized by the hemisphere. So what we are doing right now, we have to find the right projected light frame of our area light. So we can use the light frame of the actual area light, which is super easy. Then we need to find the intersection between the actual area of the shape and the actual projected area of our projected cone. So we are interested in finding this. We need to calculate this area at runtime. This is not trivial. However, you can try to approximate that. How we did that? We actually approximated that by disk intersection, rectangular disk intersection, and I think square rectangular intersection for different light types. So you got a disk light versus reflection. I mean, like let's say if you calculate this for a disk light, it's pretty easy because you've got intersection of two circles, right? So I mean, this is pretty easy. Finding that for rectangle and a circle is not that easy. We actually approximate the circle by a square. So we are cheating a bit. So let's say that you finally manage to get this area. So you know what you want to integrate your function over. And now the hard part. So you've got something called PFD. That's the probability density function, distribution function, sorry, for your actual lighting, for your specular. People here that actually know blind fonts should actually know what's happening right now. I think that's pretty easy for them. I'm not going to go into details because it's just too low level, I would say. But we approximate our PDF with an insight that if you got Gaussian distribution or Beckham distribution from any kind of lighting model, you can approximate Beckham distribution by smooth step in well-defined area. By well-defined area, I mean the probability area of your cone. So you can use smooth step to approximate Beckham distribution in the probability importance sampling cone. I hope that made some sense to some people here. If not, we can talk about this later. So you've got your area, and now you need to integrate this function, smooth step, over this area. You know the area. You do per line integration with a couple steps. You do a couple refinement of iterations, and you're done. And then you've got your fancy area lights. So this is an area light. You can see the actual line of the shining area. Some specular going on here. I would say this is pretty doable nowadays. You can just do, let's say, 20-point lights, if you can afford that. But for us, it was very, very important to have that as a unified part of the lighting pipeline. We've also got support for IES light profiles. IES light profiles are light profiles used by Philips, by many other light fixture companies. So you get to their website, you download the database of different light fixtures that are used in architectural design, and integrate it to your engine. Our engine actually pre-calculates those integrals in textures for those IES profiles, and we can just slap them on our real-time lights. The shots that you are seeing right now are from IES Viewer. It's a freeware viewer of IES profiles. So an IES profile is given by this kind of curve on the left. The curve on the left actually shows you how the light is distributed, depending on the angle and wavelength, and you've got the intensity lumens. So it's super handy and it's physically based. I highly advise artists to get this freeware thing, go through Philips database, download different IES profiles, and just have some fun rendering different projecting textures. They're like super fun in the game. So this is our setup with IES profiles. Those lights on left and right, you can see they've got some volume in them. They're volumetric lights. They're actually using IES profiles of Philips some kind of light fixture. So we don't need to paint those attenuation effects on lights, we just get them from a database that's given by Philips or any other light fixture manufacturer. And now about lighting pipeline overview. The whole overview is actually in the slide notes. We're going to focus on reflections, so on image-based lighting. So this scene is one of our highlights of the demo that we've shown on PS4. We've got tons of reflections at runtime, we've got billboards, we've got area lights, we've got tons of GI back into light maps, and we need to unify all this. You already know that our area lights are unifying the real-time analytical lighting pipeline. So we need to unify our image-based lighting. So, like, let's say tube maps. We've got a three-tier reflection ray trace system. We've got real-time glossy reflections that are working in screen space, and they are actually subject to a bit different talk. I can't really talk too much about them today, so I'm going to show you only the results. We've got localized cube maps and one skybox dome that's used as a last resort. I mean, like, if everything fails, then we're going to use the skybox. So first, we run the real-time ray trace pass in screen space. If we hit something, that means that we're done, right? I mean, we can finish our ray trace system. If it misses, then we use the localized cube maps. If localized cube maps miss, then we have to resort to skybox, and we're back to, I know, 1999, sorry. But it works pretty well in practice. So this is a typical scene lit with localized cube maps. You can see some reflection on the left side, on the ground. You can see there's some sun shining there. So all those lighting in this scene is actually pre-baked. So this is baked into one of our localized cube maps. You're going to see the grid of those cube maps in a second. But the point is that using cube maps alone is not enough. That's why you need the spectral occlusion or ray trace pass first. So if you look at those points of interest, you can see they kind of lack some details, right? Especially on the left side, you can't see the billboard, you can't see the animation because, well, it's pre-baked. And you also got bad lighting near those metal panels because the light is leaking through those details because you don't know that those details are actually there. If you run real-time ray trace, it fixes those issues. So if you're already using cube maps and you have spectral occlusion problems, just go for real-time ray tracing. Even in really short distance, I mean, you don't need to ray trace the full screen as we do, but even ray tracing couple pixels in your depth buffer or whatever, it's going to massively help you to mitigate those problems. I would say it's definitely worth it because it really grounds your scene. This is probably a bit better example, like in a global use case. So this scene also lit only with localized cube maps. Points of interest. Left wooden box. You can see that there's a light leakage problem near it. You can see there's like blue light going underneath. You don't really want it there because, well, it's breaking the scene. If that would be diffuse lighting, you would have some AO, runtime AO. But you can't use runtime AO for reflections because, well, AO is omnidirectional. You want something directional. So we use our ray trace system with different glossiness level to patch in those problems, like this. So you can see that we actually got a ton of additional reflections from, let's say, like shiny objects in the game, but we also patch light leakage problems. This is also quite a cool scene showing that this kind of system is pretty easy to use on any kind of surface, like on curvatures. This asset, the drone, is actually missing some important clues, like especially the sphere is showing super highlights on sides, which most art directors would probably like to paint over to make them even black, not to see that, because it breaks the illusion of actually having this ball as a part of the actual drone. It'll also be quite nice to have the reflection of the, let's say, jet engine. So, fixed. Basically, it's a pretty simple trick that you can use on every asset because it's a post-processing pipeline effect. Obviously, you need to take care how to integrate it properly with all your other glossiness, image-based lighting parts of the pipeline. So about localized cube maps, we've got a grid of localized cube maps. By localized cube map, I mean word space AABB box. Right now, we are starting to use rotated AABB boxes. They are generated on flight, well, not on flight, offline, and we can decide where they're going to end, what kind of resolution each zone is going to have, and what kind of shape, well, made of AABB it's going to have. So the zone is defined by center point, min, max, right now actually with rotation, and actual cube map inside. What we do during ray trace, we've got a tile-based cube map render that takes all the cube maps for the tile. It runs through all the definitions of the localized zones, and we actually analytically ray trace against the AABB. So if you got a flat scene, by flat I mean your ground is flat, or you got like a small box-alike room, you actually get really good results, like ray trace-alike results. So what you do, you cast a ray, you ray trace the ray against the side of the AABB, you find the intersection point, and you use this point to look up your cube map. And this is actually really easy to implement. It's probably one day work. You can see that number 2 on the landing platform is behaving correctly. So obviously you get your ball closer to number 2. You can see the reflections getting closer, and it's farther away. You can also get to the very end of your zone. You start seeing some loss of quality because the cube map is projected. So there's quite a huge loss of pixels near the end of this defined zone. But it's not really a big deal as long as your zones are relatively small and you need to take care for blending. So every zone that overlaps each other zone needs to blend properly. So we also have overlapping parts using different weighting schemes to do the proper blend. This is our pre-convolved cube map. This is using our custom BRDF kernel, so it's not just a Gaussian, it's not just some kind of blur. Just use the BRDF that you've got in your engine, translate this BRDF to angular solid angle used during the read of your texels, and use all of them to pre-convolve your textures. And then you're going to have results comparable to your real-time lights. What you see on the left is the cube map, on the right is the cube map with mipmaps. We use AMD cube map generator that's right now open source. I think it's got BSD license, so we are actually probably going to check in our changes with our lighting model, so all of you guys can use that as an open source. I'm not really sure about the current status of this. So if that's going to happen, it's going to happen after we launch the game, so I'm pretty sorry about this. But as of now, it's a super easy environment for artists to actually check those cube maps, to look at them. We don't really see that during production pipeline. I mean, all this stuff is hidden in DLLs. I mean, you just run the library in the background on our build farm and builds all those cube maps depending on the definition of those AABB boxes. And here's the final effect. So what you're seeing here is the localized cube map on the left side, and the region of the cube zone ends right in the middle. So this nasty warp here in the middle is because we basically cut off the zone. The right side doesn't have a localized zone. It's only using the skybox. So you can see that the ray here on the right side, the reflection ray, has nothing to bounce around, right? Because there's no localized cube map. So in that case, real-time reflections are actually helping us out. So this is a blend of a skybox with localized cube maps with real-time reflections. As we use the same BRDF kernel for real-time reflections, we use the same BRDF kernel for cube maps and the same one for the sky dome, and we care for the projection of our importance cones. Everything blends pretty perfectly. You can really see that actually on those flags on the left, because those flags are pre-baked. I guess they are probably a bit too far for the ray trace. Now we get in the ray trace and they blend in. Also, all those subsystems are using HDR FP16 textures as input. So all of this runs with HDR. There's no discrepancy in lighting. I actually forgot to say that our cube maps are also stored as BC6 cube maps. So this is like a new texture format available on any DirectX 11 graphic card. And it's basically like DXT5 footprint with higher quality and actual HDR floating point values. So highly recommended for any kind of cube map and image-based lighting. So now I'm going to show you the final slides. So this is the IBL render pass breakdown. So all the passes that we run in post-processing with image-based lighting, all of them blended in together to give you the final result. So this is the scene that we get after running real-time lights. So real-time lights are done, we're not interested in them. So that's why you can see the sunlight, you can see a couple of local lights, but the whole scene is still lacking environmental reflections. So what we do now? We first calculate our ambient BRDF that you already know. The ambient BRDF is the way how we calculate this like special BRDF for cube maps I already shown you before. This is how we call that. As you can see, there are not many colored metals in the scene. It's mostly monochromatic, not many, well, actually interesting metals, to be honest. But you can clearly see how the Fresnel kicks in, how the visibility factor kicks in. If you actually analyze all the maps that I showed you before, you can see that in this image pretty clearly. Then we run the localized cube map pass. I mean, this is actually not in the right order, because first we run real-time reflections, but for the sake of this breakdown, it makes a bit more sense to show it from this angle. So you've got the result of all your cube maps, localized cube maps, and the sky dome. So we multiply this over by our ambient BRDF factor, and we slap it on top of our previous buffer, and we end up with this. So this is already starting to look quite nice. It's not very well grounded. You can see light leakage problems here, light leakage problems near the character, and also the characters, they don't reflect in water puddles, which will be really, really handy and nice to have. So we run our real-time reflections. This is the buffer you get after the ray trace pass. The ray trace pass right now runs in half resolution, I guess. It's actually doing some upsampling, so it's fair to say it's actually doing like a full screen ray trace pass right now. It's obviously distance roughness dependent because we follow the BRDF based on those important sampling counts. So you can see that reflections farther away are more blurry, objects close by are a bit sharper. I think it's really nice to look at that here because you've got a guy standing here and there's kind of like a sharper silhouette coming through, and with the distance of the reflection it blurs away. You can really see that on the coverage mask. So this is the coverage mask. This is the mask that tells us how many samples from the ray trace actually were part of the integral that I was talking about previously. So we use this mask to blend over real-time reflections to the previous buffer. And this is our buffer before the blend. This is our buffer before all happening. And here you can see the, where was that? Sorry. Yes, so this is the final composite. So you can see that we've got the bounce of light coming here from the ground. You can see the real-time reflections of those guys also. And everything is really nicely grounded. So this is like the main difference that you get before image lighting pass and after image lighting pass. You can also see that bounces of the sunlight are also taken into consideration because we run the ray trace pass after the lighting pass. So if you want to have a reflection of the reflection of your sunlight, it's going to happen. We also have some trickery to actually have double bounces of our reflections, so we can get multiple reflection bounces in our game. So the takeaway of this talk is that you really, really want to use physically based lighting in your game. Just not really for the sake of fancy, high quality, not really for the sake of details, but for the sake of production. You want to cut down the time of your production, you want to produce them faster, and you have to have higher quality. This is something that I really highly recommend. About physical area lights, I would say that right now it requires, it's pretty easy to implement them as soon as basically you figure out how to do them. I'm pretty convinced that there's going to be a full paper about that with the actual implementation. You just have to wait a bit when we have the green light to show those things in detail. I think that in the slides that I've got in extras, there's enough information for you to reverse engineer that, maybe to find a better solution for area lights. But at least it's a nice direction to go if you want to really have an easier workflow. And real-time reflections, I would say just go for it. It's super simple to implement, at least the basic ones. If you implement screen space reflections just for the sake of occlusion of your cube maps, that's going to be a huge win. Definitely a huge win. And right now, probably the final slide, we are hiring.